You know how it is when election season rolls around, we hear a ton of claims from politicians about their records. But how often do we actually get to see those claims held up against the facts? Well, in this explainer, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're digging into the record of one Rutherford County politician, using a detailed analysis to see how their biggest talking points really measure up. And, that statement right there, it really sets the stage for us. The official wants this election to be a referendum on fiscal responsibility. So, okay, let's take them up on that. We're going to use their own theme as the lens for this entire breakdown, comparing what they claim to what the source's analysis of their record says. So here's how we're going to break this all down. We've got 5 main stops. First, we'll look at the politician's own report card on their term. Then we'll dive right into the county's books. After that, we'll check out some big wins and ask, hey, who really gets the credit here? We're also going to unpack the heated local battle over a landfill before circling all the way back to cast our own verdict in this referendum. All right, first up, the official's own report card. Think of this as their highlight reel, right? These are the key achievements they want voters to have front and center in their minds. This really sets the stage for everything else we're about to dig into. Okay, moving on to our second section. This is where we get to the real heart of the matter, balancing the county's books. This is the first, and arguably the biggest, test of that whole promise of fiscal responsibility. So here it is, the headline claim. They conquered a massive inherited deficit and achieved real balanced budgets for 3 straight years. I mean, that sounds like a huge fiscal turnaround, right? And this is where things start to get really interesting. On the left, you got the claim, real balanced budgets. But on the right, the source's analysis paints, well, a very different picture. It says that for over a decade, the county has consistently spent more money than it brought in, and that trend didn't stop. It kept going for all 3 years under this administration. It's kind of like saying your personal budget is balanced because you paid all your bills, but you had to keep dipping in your savings account to do it. The source is basically arguing that's not what a truly balanced budget looks like. So what about that massive $64 million deficit they conquered? Well, according to the source, this wasn't really a typical deficit, where you're short on cash for the year. It was more like taking over a house that still has a 30-year mortgage on it. The debt was absolutely real, but it was a long-term obligation, not some sudden short-term crisis that this administration uniquely solved. And this whole idea of inheritance is kind of a running theme here. Which brings us perfectly to our third section, where we look at some major successes during this politician's term and ask a pretty simple question. Who really gets the credit? Now, a AAA bond rating, that's a huge deal for any government. It's like having a perfect credit score. It means you can borrow money at the absolute best rates. And the claim is that this was achieved under the current administration. But this timeline from the source lays it all out pretty clearly. As you can see, that AAA bond rating, it was first achieved under the previous administration. So the current official inherited it. They didn't earn it from scratch. And it's pretty much the same story with the plan to build 5 new fire halls. That decision was made before this administration even took office. So while the buildings are, in fact, getting completed, the source points out that the foundational work, the decision, the planning, all that happened before this term even began. The claim of completion is technically accurate, but the implication that they started it, well, according to this analysis, that's misleading. Okay, let's switch gears and move on to section 4. We're going to tackle an issue that, let's be honest, often matters most to people, the stuff happening right in their own backyard. In this case, it was the really contentious fight over the local landfill. The claim here is pretty direct. The administration's work, and specifically the new transfer station they built, is the reason the landfill expansion was stopped. The transfer station is being presented as the key piece of the puzzle, the solution that won the fight. But here's the thing. According to the source, the real story wasn't about construction. It was a total legal drama. The expansion was actually stopped in 3 key steps. And look, none of them involved the transfer station. First, a regional board rejected the plan. Then, when that was challenged, a judge upheld their decision. And the final nail in the coffin? A separate court ruling that blocked state regulators from even processing the application. It was a victory won in the courtroom, not at a construction site. So the source's bottom line on this is crystal clear. The transfer station might be a nice new facility for the county, but it played exactly 0 legal role in stopping the landfill from getting bigger. The real credit, this analysis says, belongs to the boards and the courts. Okay, time to bring it all home. This is our final section, the referendum. The politician wanted this election to be about their record, especially on fiscal responsibility. So, how does that record actually stack up when we look at the final, most important numbers? So, remember that guiding philosophy claimed by the official conservative financial principles. Typically, that means you're thinking low taxes and really careful spending. And then the source drops this bombshell. Right under this same administration, residents were hit with the single largest property tax increase in the entire history of the county. That's a finding that seems to fly directly in the face of fiscal conservatism. And really, this table kind of says it all, doesn't it? It's the core of the source's whole analysis. On one side, you've got the claims, conservative principles, and frugal spending. And on the other, you've got the record, the biggest tax hike in county history, and budgets that spent more than they took in year after year. So when you put it all together, what's the source's final verdict? Well, it argues that this politician's record relies on a few key things: conflating achievements they inherited with their own, misrepresenting the legal history of that big landfill fight, and maybe most importantly, framing deficit spending and historic tax hikes as some kind of conservative fiscal stewardship. And that brings us to a huge question, not just for voters in this one county, but for all of us, really. When a leader claims credit for something, how do we figure out what the real bottom line is? The source here suggests the real story isn't in the sound bites. It's buried in the spreadsheets, the timelines, and the court documents. The only question left is, are we willing to look?